Hey, all you space cats. Welcome to the Black Hole Podcast, Season 7, Episode 38. I'm Mitch Miller, your host. The most neutral human being on the planet. The most transparent presidential candidate you'll ever find. And I'm a free market entrepreneur. So I want to address those that hide behind missiles, right? The politicians that hide behind their rockets and their missiles. Because I just want to break this down. The nuclear weapons program and the space program in the United States are basically fascist in nature. And if you work for these programs, you need to acknowledge this. During World War II, the Nazis developed the V-2 rocket program. This allowed them to strike targets in the UK and other targets around Europe with rockets with a payload of explosives on them. Now, after World War II, the United States took half of these V-2 rocket scientists into their program, and Russia took the other half of the V-2 scientists. Then we start developing rockets to send satellites into space. And I got this information from a Danish public library, computer network, right? You're not going to find a lot of this information on the corporate communist controlled and censored United States internet network, as I've explained. But if you venture out into other countries, you use their public libraries, you go to a neutral country like Denmark, you might find new information on the internet. So they start sending rockets, and they develop a rocket that can send a satellite. This is when the Intelsat agreement forms. And again, I got this from a Danish library. The original agreement was between United States, Russia, and China. They would each send a pair of Intelsat satellites into space for communications. And as a safeguard, they developed a special office in the Pentagon and the Kremlin and the Chinese contingent so that the militaries could stay in direct contact as we developed space satellites and things like that. So that's the original Intelsat agreement that I found on a Danish library system. So the byproduct of space rockets, right? We're developing in the United States space rockets to deliver satellites. The byproduct is intercontinental ballistic missiles with thermonuclear warheads on them. So both programs come from fascist roots. The Nazis were a fascist regime that committed all kinds of atrocities and tried to take over the world. And these scientists were the main people fueling this space rocket program, intercontinental ballistic missile rocket program. Now, the big three media companies in the United States, they wanted to send their own satellites, right? They like to pretend like they're top secret agents and they can send satellites and have all kinds of corporate secrets, you know. These big three media companies in the United States, they wanted to send their own satellites. They didn't want to have an agreement with other countries to send things into space. So they framed this whole scientific venture as the space race, right? We have an announcement, we're going to put a man on the moon. And the media companies frame it as the space race. It's a race between Russia and the United States to put a man on the moon or develop space technology. It's a space race. And it's basically two sets of Nazi scientists competing to build better and more complicated rockets and missiles. Then the United States, we make it to the moon, right? We put a man on the moon. Yay, we won the war. We won the race. However you want to frame it. We won the race for space. The United States now owns space, right? Because they framed it this way. We own space and can send as many satellites as we want without having to make agreements with nations. The big three media companies can send as many quote-unquote communication satellites as they want. And that's how we end up with basically a Bond villain here in the United States, right? He has thousands of satellites or hundreds of satellites orbiting the planet. He's developing brain implants. These brain implants could connect wirelessly with these satellites. Who knows what he's doing with the brain implants? And we let this Bond villain, we let him do anything because he released the patents to electric cars, right? He allowed the big three automakers to use the patents for electric vehicles and transition to electric vehicles. So he can do whatever he wants. Become a Bond villain, send thousands of satellites, develop brain implants, and nobody questions them, except for maybe me. And I also want to focus on the U.S. policy of entrapment for recruiting talent, right? And this dates back to V2 rocket program even before that. But these V2 Nazis, these V2 scientists, these Nazi scientists, the United States undoubtedly promised that they would not prosecute them for war crimes, for being Nazis, if they worked for the United States to develop our rocket programs. Right? It's entrapment. Hey, we won't prosecute you, but you have to come work for us in our government. And now in the new arms race of computer technology, the United States often entraps the best hackers out there working on the internet. They say, we caught you breaching security firewalls on these government-related networks, and we're not going to prosecute you if you come work for the United States government, right? We get the best hackers by entrapping them. If the government were honest and transparent, like I've proposed, then the talent would want to work for the U.S. government, even if the salary wasn't the same as they could get in the private sector. So I want to talk about some programs I talked about in previous episodes and previous seasons. For all you space cats out there, all you NASA employees, for the fascist NASA department of the government. At least you have fascist roots, and we can get that out in the open now. So you can rethink how you look at space. Right? So I want to talk about a moon program that I would enact as president or as head of NASA if NASA voted on that. Because we're talking about colonizing the moon, and to me, and to most people, the moon is a vista, right? It's a view. It's a view we can see with the naked eye. We can all see it, except for visually impaired people. But most human beings can see the moon. And that's why I believe everyone must vote before we colonize the moon, before we put a blemish on this view, this pristine view of the moon. Everyone on the planet should vote on whether we should colonize the moon or not. So I would devote a significant amount of resources. I wouldn't dip into planetary defense resources. I believe NASA and a space program are important for planetary defense, especially against asteroids, comets, however you phrase it, striking the Earth. That's why I do think that we need to continue to have a nuclear program. We can't phase out nuclear armament totally, but we need to do it logically in a common sense way and realize the fascist roots of these programs. I would devote significant resources into rolling out a worldwide vote of every adult human being on the planet Earth. Simple vote should we colonize the moon, yes or no? So if you work for NASA, vote for me for head of NASA. Maybe if you don't vote for me for president, you can vote me in as NASA. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the U.S. Postal Service. What I would do as Postmaster General or as president. We have social media companies, right? And they take our information, our posts, our pictures, and they can use them however they want. We sign an agreement for the convenience of using social media. And many people post pictures of their children to social media in order to share with friends and family, right? Their progress, their growing up, their accomplishments. And social media can take these pictures of these children and use it on a billboard in Japan, for instance, right? They show up on a billboard. Nobody's going to see that billboard here in the United States to promote whatever they want. I think there should be an alternative. I think there should be an alternative to posting pictures of your children on social media to share with friends and family. As president, I would take the U.S. Postal Service to a new route, right? Right now we have a Postmaster General that's running it into the ground because he was a Republican plant and the Republicans want to phase out the Postal Service or privatize it or whatever. I would take the Postal Service in a new direction, and I talk about this in a previous episode, some ideas, but I would definitely push to roll out an email service for each U.S. citizen. They would get one email account through the U.S. Postal Service. Ideally, it would be encrypted, right? When you send these emails, they're encrypted, protect you from spying by corporations or other governments. And in order to verify this one email account per U.S. citizen, you may have to jump through significant hoops, provide photo ID, so on and so forth, proof of address. But each U.S. citizen would get their own email account through the U.S. Postal Service and be able to send photos and hypothetically video via encrypted email messages to their email list of friends and family, right? Right now you have to use a privately owned email account. If you want free email, if it's not provided by your work, you have to use, corporate emails that are owned by Google and other companies that hypothetically can take your information. There should be a government option for people to share messages, pictures, possibly video with their friends and family that corporations aren't able to snoop on, right? Even your work, you're not really supposed to send private emails through work emails. And I want to talk about this policy that the U.S. government that I would change as president, especially concerning technology, how they always go with the cheapest bidder, or usually go with the cheapest bidder the cheapest bid on a new program, a new software, new machines. I would take this policy, because you're trying to save the taxpayer, your budget is this or whatever. I would go with a medium bidder or possibly the highest bidder. But I would mandate, if you're going to get this government contract, you have to be as transparent as possible, if not completely transparent, with all of this taxpayer money, at least on this job that you bid. Maybe not your company itself has to be totally transparent yet, but on this government job, you have to be totally transparent. Maybe the government already does that. I haven't looked into that. I try not to search a lot of things on this corporate communist censored internet system. I pull things from other sources, the communications around me. So that's where I would go with the U.S. Postal Service, and I have some ideas of how we can incorporate technology into the U.S. Postal Service, give every American an option so that they don't have to post pictures of their kids on social media. I discourage that at all costs. I don't encourage sharing things on social media, especially images of children that have no say in where that image goes. Now that's me. I want to give you an option. I'm not trying to criticize parents that do that because they have no option and they want to share with their family their children's accomplishments and they're proud of them. All right. So that's all I wanted to talk about on this episode. Until next time, I wish you peace, prosperity, and homeostasis.